All right. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the show. Of course, this is TFT Tinfoil Talk. We're very happy to have you come and join in us. We're going to be talking about Operation Paperclip, a very, very interesting little series of events that happened after World War II. And we're going to be diving into that with our panel here. And happy to have you guys come up, and maybe you have some information to add to it for sure. But one of the first things we always like to do is have you guys check out our links down below and come and be part of what we're doing on Fanspeak, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, guys, how you doing today, Todd?
I'm doing really good. How are you?
I'm great, man. We've had some sunny days here, so the rain seemingly has stopped. The rainy season went like a good 5 weeks or more longer than it usually does. So it's definitely going to affect our produce coming out in September and October, unfortunately. But oh well.
Well, don't let that stop your canoe making plans.
I won't. I won't. Not at all. And I still haven't decided if I want to do that or go something a little bit bigger with like a mini yacht. But that would take years instead of a year. But yeah, that's a conversation for another day. Maybe we should have a show talking about that kind of stuff a little bit because you have some interesting historical understandings of stuff as well, sir.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I worked in gun manufacturing
Hmm.
and got to the point where I wasn't creative, but working in engraving and stuff, but nothing too big.
Yeah, but it's still cool. You're making Smith and Wesson revolvers, man. That's a beautiful art form, actually.
To the degree of which they still do it the way they've been doing for the last years, yeah, I
Yeah.
would agree because they haven't changed. Even the leather, like there's this wheel that they make with where they pin this leather to the wheel.
Hmm.
Um, we bought all that grade of leather on the planet because we knew it would no longer be made the way it was. So we have a storeroom full of it because it was going to kind of disappear.
Wow, that's interesting. I didn't know
Yeah.
that. But no, some of those really high end, like like Smith and Wesson type of revolvers, they are just gorgeous piece of human technology, man. They're beautiful things, and so I appreciate that. But yeah, I like working my hands. How about you guys in the chat? Do you have any hobbies where you make things with your hands? How about in the panel? We got George and Denali in here. Do you guys make anything with your hands other than art, of course?
No, not really, not especially.
Lego.
Legos. Oh, there you go. That's something. I've always enjoyed making things with my hands. Actually, it was kind of interesting. We were talking to Ghost of Henry a couple of weeks ago, and I'd love to have a deeper conversation with him. But he does something that I do, where he makes knives. Now, he might well be better than I am because I'm not very good at it. But then again, I need to find an extra $50,000 laying around somewhere so I can build my workshop. Hmm. That's kind of a problem. But anyway, this conversation is already off the rails. But how you doing today, Denali?
I'm doing okay. Sunshine is out there, so that means that we're going to have sunny weather for a time before the rain comes again, which is
Right.
good and bad. Florida weather, typical stuff. And I'm excited to talk about today's show, about the whole German scientists that we brought over under
Hmm.
Paperclip, Operation Paperclip.
Yeah, no,
And
it's
I'm
very interesting. Yeah.
yeah, and I'm also excited working on my project Immortal Mask, which everybody can join the newsletter with the link below. Just send me an email, say I want to join the newsletter at dinalescomic@gmail.com, and I will keep everybody appraised to any updates on that
Hmm.
project.
Yep. And awesome. All right. And of course, we also have George with us. How you doing, George?
Greetings, greetings. I'm doing fine. I'm very excited about this Operation Paperclip. I did an um, in-depth study on it. I went deep into the rabbit hole,
Hmm.
and I think what I'm going to be presenting first, hopefully, if everyone's okay with that, because I have so much to do here at George Central.
Hmm.
And also, Joe
Yeah.
King is going to be taking off the market this September. So get your chance to get a 96-page book, 18 trading cards, and original art, all for one low price.
There you go, folks. All right. Well, we might as well just go ahead and get right into it. We got a small crew in here for TFT. If you guys, of course, one of the things, like we say, always say, we appreciate the subscriptions and the likes. We are growing. That's an awesome thing. But we are live streamers, so the thing that helps us the most is hitting that share button and letting your family and friends and extended community know what's going on. So we really appreciate it if you guys do that. But I'm going to go over and I'm going to kind of do the introduction like I always do to the topic. So let me share here. All right. So you guys can white box me and see what I'm doing. But the first thing I want to do here is bring this up and this. Now, Operation Paperclip, I think most people in the West have at least heard about it. And the general idea was that after World War II, the Russians and the Americans were chasing around and hunting, trying to find German scientists because, for some reason they were light years ahead of everybody else in the world, which in and of itself is an interesting conversation. Now, why is that? And there's a lot of conspiracy theories around that, in and of itself, right? How is it they were so far ahead? Are they just simply that much smarter than everybody, or did they have some kind of advantage? And there's conspiracy theories ranging from them hunting down magical artifacts, like you see in Indiana Jones, the original one. And of course, they did do that. That was something they did. I mean, look at the swastika. They picked that up from ancient things. I mean, the swastika has been around forever, and it's everywhere on the planet. Every culture has an aspect of the bent cross, right? So they were really into that, and of course, some of the other theories are, crashed alien ships and them reverse engineering technology, yada yada. Great conversations for TFT, I'd say. But today we're talking more about what happened between the race between America and the Soviet Union to get these scientists. And I think I'll go and do look at the exact number in a minute, but I think America had around 14 to 1600 of them, maybe 1800 in the end, and the Russians got about 2200 of them or so. But of course, the real conversation is not about how we created NASA around them and all the technology that came out of it. But the really interesting thing is, who are these people? Right? And of course, the most famous one is Werner von Braun, as you see up here on the screen right now. Now, I know these other guys have presentations, so I don't want to dig into it. I always kind of try to sit on the back end and catch up little things where maybe I could fill a hole in here or there if possible. We'll see. There might not be much of that today. I think these guys are well prepared. But nevertheless, he's the big name, but he's not the only name. So let me take a second here and go over and just kind of take a look at Operation Paperclip itself here, just Wikipedia, right? And of course, the official thing on Wikipedia says Operation Paperclip was a secret program of the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, largely carried out by special agents of Army CIC, in which more than 1,600 Germans, there you go, German scientists, engineers, and technicians such as Werner von Braun and his V2 rocket team. Now, I'll hold that off. I'll wait and see if these guys bring that up. But the interesting thing is you come down to these lists down here. And it's talking about some of these ones, the key recruits that are brought over, and they have a names of all these people in here and some of the things they do. But of course, the real interesting point about these guys is they weren't just German scientists, because a lot of times people say that, oh, they're the good Germans, and no, actually, a lot of these guys were gold pin members, meaning that they were close to the Adolf Hitler himself. They were part of the Nazi Party, and they were some pretty vicious people. This is the thing that no one wants to talk about. And of course, no one really knew about Operation Paperclip until I think 88. 89, where you had, of course, Linda Hunt, was a journalist. She dug into it and she got information and brought it out to light. And this is kind of another interesting point I want to mention before I drop it over to George here to do his presentation. Being in America, a lot of times we say we're America's the most free place on the on the planet. Land of the free, right? And people will argue that, saying, "Well, look at all our taxes, look at all our laws, and if you live in a Democratic Party controlled state or city, you have less freedoms than elsewhere." It's true, but there are many little things that actually give us more freedom than anyone else, and one of those things is the Freedom of Information Act. I mean, you go find me another country in the world that has something like that where they weren't forced to do it, right? That's one thing about that makes America very unique in that fact that we cannot, our government in the end can't keep things secret, and it ends up coming out to the people. And I love the Information Freedom of Information Act, and of course, this is where Linda Hunt found all her information and put out her breaking story. Because until that point, until the late '80s, no one really knew about Operation Paperclip in general, and particularly how Nazi they were, right? They're not just German scientists, they were Nazi scientists. And some of them, are said to be, oh, no, well, I was forced to do this and that. No, that's not true at all. Actually, especially the big boy who everybody knows because he's the head of NASA for a while. And of course, we had another German that was head of NASA, who's pictured right here on the right. They were full on Nazis, actually, hardcore ones. So, like I said, I'm going to back up and I'm not going to get in the way here, and I'm going to let these guys do their presentation. So, George, you go ahead and do your thing, man.
All right, all right. My presentation is short, and I'm going to start off with a little inventory for my presentation.
Mhm.
Let me get to the inventory. Clipboard, disinfectant wipes, scalpel,
Mhm.
anesthesia,
Mhm.
reluctant surgeons, gambling debt, and a machine that goes bing. Of course, the paperclip. Thank you. Thank you very much. That's my presentation. Operation Paperclip.
Are you serious?
I didn't have anything. I mean, I've been working. I've been working like a dog all day, Saturday and Sunday, and I wanted to come here prepared. And I'm telling you, this whole paperclip thing started driving me nuts. I mean, I was on it for like a couple of hours during on and off during the day, and it was like a rabbit hole. I couldn't even make head or tail of it. It was absolutely insane. All these people, all these monsters that America brought over
Mhm.
and gave them cushy jobs for
Mhm.
crying out loud. And we have American intelligence, stamina, just people who strive for the American dream. And you bring these monsters over,
Mhm.
and what do? They literally create a system within the American society, and they're
Yeah,
completely destroying it from within. This whole thing with NASA, it's all BS. It's all Nazi propaganda.
possibly.
The entire system where the news media is lying to you. It's all created by the Nazis, and we are systematically being destroyed from within by the Nazis. Weren't we supposed to be victorious over the Nazis in World War II?
Well,
What was it was like a reverse corporate takeover. Oh yeah,
well,
Disney's going to take over Fox. Well, what happened? Fox ended up getting quite a bit of shares out of Disney in that deal.
yeah,
It's
but
like
yeah, I understand this argument, George, and I've heard it several times before. But here's the thing: you're not really giving enough credit to our very own monsters, dude. You think American government is some soft little thing, dude? You don't think they knew what they're doing? I mean, most people can understand that. Hey, the Russians were grabbing a bunch of scientists in there when they took Berlin. When the Hague came up, the Americans went in when they were doing the trials and grabbed a lot of them out. I understand the competitive nature of it. I mean, most people can get that. But to this, I've heard this argument many times that they took over NASA, and which is true to a point, and that the America's been has been being run by Nazis ever since.
I,
And
I, I,
yeah,
I suspected you were going to say that. I sincerely suspected you were going to say that.
uh-huh,
But from what I understand it takes monsters of this caliber to create monsters. Before World War One and Two, America, the what's it, the psyche
hmm
of the American people was a very righteous psyche. It was a very wholesome psyche. I mean, yeah, there's been blips here and there, but it wasn't to this level. It wasn't to the point where Nazis would actually do horrific testing on people who were about to be gassed and whatnot.
well, sure.
These monsters that were brought here were an exceptional level above anything else, and they were incorporated into the system where low level demons, if you want to call them, within the American system, American demons.
Well,
They looked at these guys and they said, "Well, we got to up our game."
yeah, I get what you're saying, dude. And I do. But there's a couple of points I throw out to you. First of all, the German people weren't particularly any more guilty than anybody else during wartime. The Nazis are a separate issue. Second of all, Adolf Hitler based his entire fascistic government, not only off of the Italian socialism. System of fascism, right? But he also based it upon the American governmental system, dude. A lot of what the Nazi government was built upon was what America was doing. He actually was he had a lot of respect for what America did, and he was trying to model Germany after America. Actually, this is something that people don't like to talk about. Another thing people don't like to talk about is the fact that the victor writes the history, and during that war, America was doing experiments on humans too. And no one talks about that either, George.
No,
I just think you
of course they don't.
misunderstanding that. I think the American monsters were way bigger and badder than the Nazi ones actually.
Yeah,
And
I
you know,
can't see that
mhm,
within the American system, there's a constant checks and balances.
mhm,
Even if our homegrown monsters, shall we say, try to work within the system and circumvent the system,
mhm.
there was no checks and balances in Germany. There was no
Yeah,
at all.
true. I get that point, George. But you do realize that how many levels below the highest security clearance the President of the United States is? You
I
know,
would imagine uh, one or two.
no, it's probably
I
about
mean,
five. That, as far as I know, it's five. It might well be more
five
than
really?
that. Yeah. The point is, the president of the United, and that's shocking, right? The president of the United States should
Yeah, it
have
is
clearance to
actually.
everything, right? Well, I think we'd all agree, but he doesn't. Right? This is not a new thing, but I get your point. I've heard this argument several times before, and who knows? It could be true. We might be the Third Reich in hiding, for all I know. But this is a continuous argument. Yeah, interesting though.
Yeah.
Anybody have any comments on the idea that America is Nazis in hiding, and we've been taken over by them after World War II, meaning that the Germans won the war?
No. Like, I mean, yes, I do want to say something, and no,
Mm.
it
But you've heard
didn't
this
happen.
argument before, though, right? This is not a new argument. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, this is probably the biggest, most well-known case of this type in which Nazi personnel were in America, which leads to this type of argument,
Yeah,
and
yeah, that's
and the
right.
idea that their political ideas have influenced us, our government, and we're now living the Fourth Reich or whatever. And
Yeah. Mhm.
I don't believe that, because our government system itself is still in place, in which you have people voting, um, the electoral college, the constitution, all that is still in place. And what we have learned from the scientific minds that came from them is an entirely different batch of knowledge
It's true.
than
Yeah,
political science.
that's true.
Yeah. I would like to add to that what you just said, Wolf, is that there's two documents that hold strong the United States from being wrecked into a monstrous society. Bill of Rights and the Constitution. Those two pieces of paper and the respect that they demand out of the world, actually, is what's keeping these monsters in check to a point.
We are in more danger now of adopting fascist policies than we were when we brought them over in the
That's true.
1950s.
That is a fair point. Yeah, because the Democratic Party is going complete communist, dude. I mean,
Right. Yeah.
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 No, but it kind of tickles my mind in the idea that with another conspiracy theory, which I don't think we've really covered yet. We do need to tackle it one of these days. Is of course flat Earth, and and it's a good example because a lot of conspiracy theories. Well, I'd say all conspiracy theories are based upon some kernels of truth, right? And with the flat Earth people, there's 2 points that actually come up. One is the fact that the math, as far as how far you can see a horizon line, is wrong. It's obviously wrong. It's been proven wrong thousands of times. So the science itself is a problem. But then again, that brings us back to how do scientists speak. How often do you see a scientist come up and give a presentation on Nova or Discovery Channel or something like that, and they present it to you as a truth, and they leave out this very important word, theory, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
This creates a problem. And then the second problem is NASA lies left and right. Now, they might well have good reason to be lying. Maybe it's simply the government has made it classified or something like that. But because they're always lying and always creating nonsense, this kind of culminates with that science that isn't understood yet, and creates the flat Earth society. I mean, that's what it does, right? And I think it's a perfect example because every conspiracy theory can fall under this kind of scrutiny. And the whole Nazi thing, I get it. I get the argument, especially because if you look at Werner von Braun, which I think Denali's going to pick up here in a second, but that dude was very powerful and he was a superstar. And that guy, he used to do things because he's a V2 guy, right? He used to do things like when just to make sure to keep his workers in line, he would find the a few of the slowest Jews that week, and he would hang them outside of his factory to warn all the other workers to work faster. That's Werner von Braun, and he was one of the most well-known scientists in American history, right? So, mm,
Okay, now to close up my presentation,
mm,
I'm gonna leave everyone with an actual real world example of Operation Paperclip and the false flags.
mhm.
Now,
False flags, yeah.
when the current, I believe, I'm very sad about the shootings that happened recently in the last couple of days. But the reality is that in Detroit and Chicago, that's considered a Tuesday, and no
Oh,
one's really talking about those, and which happens practically every week. But here's the thought. It has been argued and debunked, of course, but it has constantly been argued that video games cause people to go out and shoot people,
hmm
and that has been constantly being pushed upon the public. So many times it's common knowledge now. But
yeah, hmm
let me submit this to you: the lies of the mainstream media are a lot worse than video games. They're a lot more insidious, and the lies that they push cause incitement in weak-minded people, or easily manipulated people, or easily hypnotized people to actually act out on their absurd thoughts. So you're watching this now. You're watching this video now. Tune over to CNN or whatever mainstream media news. Listen to them for 5 minutes, and you when you hear the lies against the real world um, information, you'll understand that their constant lies is Operation Paperclip in action right
Okay, well,
now.
that's a stretch. I agree 100% that what's going on with the shootings right in America right now is complete theater. Of course it is. Just as you said, go watch just a few minutes, and you're going to see all these people they're putting up mugging for that camera like mad. Yeah, I get it. But and it's every time the Democrats put their foot in it, there's always shootings that come up after it. It's kind of a standard thing, right? We can, a matter of fact, I'd love to see someone do a scientific documentation of it because it literally seems every time the Democrats do something really, really stupid, and everyone in the country's looking at them, all of a sudden there's some kind of shooting or violence or some kind of thing happening to distract. But that is pure theater. I agree with you. Yeah, for sure. It's sad too because it's disgusting. But that's
Okay.
that's the world we live
Thank
in.
you. Thank you. That's my presentation. I'm here till Tuesday.
Thank you, George.
Mhm.
But all right. Well, yeah,
Okay.
I kind of figured that was going to come up. It's interesting, but let's move over to a different perspective. Now, Denali,
Right here. Yeah.
I'm going to jump over to you. Now,
Yep.
where exactly do you want me to start?
All right.
Just in
So
order.
yeah, I'm gonna do this in order of how everything comes in, and then I'm gonna talk about Warren von Braun, Warner
Okay.
von Braun, and what he contributed to NASA and all that stuff. So to start with, um, Operation Paperclip really originated in May of 1944, where the Allied forces, America particularly, were rounding up all these Nazi sympathizers, scientists, technician, and engineer, from migrating
Hmm.
to other country like Spain, Italy, and everything, because they didn't want them to continue researching those projects as they were doing for the Nazis and trying to build up the Nazi again in those small cells. So it originally became as Project Safe Haven to collect these people before they could um, burst out like a seed and corral them. So it wasn't a first race against space in the Soviet Unions at that time because we were still in so condition with the Soviet Unions.
Hmm.
Um, which translated to Operation Overcast, which was spearheaded by Major uh, Staver on July 20th, 1947, when Major Staver started rounding these guys thanks to a document called the Olsenberg List that was used by the Third Reich to round up, all these scientists, information, make sure that there were correct political leanings to be in these Nazi projects. They used that same list to hunt all of these technicians down, and they shared it with the Allies. And at that time, the Soviet Union also had access to that document.
Hmm.
And during that Operation Overcast, he learned about the V2 rockets and these advanced technologies that the Nazi scientists were researching, which led to Truman approving Operation Paperclip September 3rd, 1946, which they were able to round out 1,600 scientists, technician, engineers, and some of their family and migrate them to the United States to
Hmm.
work for us. A month later, October 22nd, 1964, the Soviet Union, with their own Operation Osavakim, I do apologize for our Russian audience butchering that name. They were able to get 16,000 families, technicians, scientists, and everything to work on their project. And
Right.
that's where the race between the space race began between the United States and the Soviet Unions at that time.
Hmm.
Interesting enough, with that, the CIA creates the Office of Scientific Intelligence, OSI, in 1949. The original purpose for that office was to create the Manchurian candidates and the
Hmm.
MK Ultra. And all of this, what I found, was found on www.cia.gov. Thank you, Information Act,
Yeah. Right.
for it.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well.
The Operation Paperclip actually continued until 1999, and the U.S. obtained $10 billion in intellectual uh, reparations in patents and processes, thanks to all of this uh, man labor and brain drain, so to speak. That's how much we got from the German people,
Oh yeah.
from scientists. Now, coming back to von Braun, he's the director of Saturn V rockets, one of the directors who built up NASA and start sending people up to the moon. Basically, the Soviet Union were using the German scientists who were working the same team, who were part of the same team as our German Nazi scientists, and we were basically the two teams were competing against each other to get to the moon. If we get to the moon, if we're to believe. What's interesting about what Chester touched about is that he started using the idea from Hans Kemmerman, the SS general of the Soviet Union, to use concentration camp prisoner as slave laborers.
That's right.
And the chief engineer of the V2 rocket factory, Arthur Rudolph, who was under von Braun, used all that Jewish people to build those rockets. About 20,000 Jewish people died of illness, beating, hangings, and intolerable working conditions.
Yep, under
Von
him.
Braun,
Yeah.
yeah, under him. And von Braun denied all of that. He said, I was never near that. But you don't inspect the rocket to make sure it's working without visiting the factories. Let me see. And he was arrested and he was captured by the Allies forces and brought over to work on the V2 projects,
Yep.
which led to the V rockets and all that
Matthew was
stuff.
also mentioning the Kurt Debus was the
Mhm.
Nazi, a Nazi, a big time Nazi, and director of the Johnson Space Center. Yeah, I'm thinking Denali's going to get to that, dude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So part of that is, going. He was taken under Operation Paperclip that we're talking about. He was silenced to, the National Secrecy Act and the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency falsified all his employment, expunged, his membership to the Nazi Party to completely hide his credentials as a Nazi operator. When he was part of the Nazi, his rank was, let me see if I can remember thing. I believe it was colonel status, equivalent of a colonel in the National German Society Socialistic Party, which is crazy to think about. We had one of these top tier leaders of the Nazi regime working for us on that. Moving to the U.S. states, he worked first with the U.S. Army, enlisting all the people, sorting them out, and starting to build the V2 projects for it. He was part of the Korean Wars, working for these uh, cruise missiles. He's part of that development of the nuclear ballistic missiles as well.
Mhm.
And he was also part of the Jupiter C first satellite Explorer 1 as well, which
Yeah.
is crazy. And this is
Um,
before this is before the NASA's involvement as well.
Sure. Yeah, Matthew, no, we appreciate the interaction, dude. And
Mhm.
Thunder is completely right here. You go, guys, and comment all you want. Absolutely, it's a good point. And keep in mind that if you want to be on the show and you want to come chat with us and give your opinion, and you say you're quite knowledgeable and you like this kind of stuff, we'd love to have you on the show, dude. Not at all. Don't stop commenting. Keep commenting. That's what we want. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Dinale.
I don't know. I mean, it's crazy to think about it. And he's not just the only ones that came over. Um, he was the one who was one of the architects that planned the lunar mission to the lunar missions to get into the moon and travel back. He developed that with the rest of the NASA team. He thought about the space flights and he published that all in there. Part of the involvement as a NASA employee was his involvement with Walt Disney and Disney Studio as a technical director, where he was part of the Disneyland 3 television
Hmm.
special about space exploration.
That's right. And of course,
Um,
he would be,
it,
right? It makes sense, right?
right, exactly. And if you don't believe it, Chester, if you can show that video,
Yep.
we'll just do a small snippet of it.
Here to reveal a plan for a trip around the moon
Yep. So you got JFK with von Braun, where he's inspecting
Oh,
the
listen, listen,
V2
listen.
rockets. Hmm.
God, I wish we made that. That's what I wanted to see because that's not what he built. He built the set and rockets, of course. But
Hmm.
But you see the idea he had, which eventually became our shuttle, was the idea to push the ship into space and then be able to have it come back down. You could see the concept was already there, and of course the actual creation of it became the shuttle program. But you can see very in the very beginning that was what it was thinking. It's quite interesting, actually.
Right, and we didn't have the technology at that time to do that. It was the technology he was forward thinking with the technology,
Hmm.
but we didn't have the computer capable enough to do that. Actually, the computer and the lunar module were the most advanced in the world of that time.
That's true. And look at the station he's talking about too. And of course, what Denali's trying to say, making a point of, this is coming from a museum, which I'll give them credit here in a second. But
Mhm.
this is actually created by Walt Disney. These videos, and as they should be. And of course, Matthew here says it's like the footage of Tony Stark's dad. Well, dude, it's intentionally that way. They did that on purpose, right?
Mm.
Um,
Yes.
you know, there's a, a comic book version of the boys, and they mention Operation Paperclip. They do. You're right. They do that.
Hmm.
But this is a very interesting video. I've seen this one before, and of course, some people say, "Oh, these Nazis and Walt Disney was sitting talking to one." Oh no. Well, uh, let's
Well,
back up for half a second, right?
The difference between this looking like Tony Stark's dad and this being Werner von Braun
Hmm.
is that in this particular instance, it's Dr. Zolar.
Right. Yeah,
right.
that's right. Yeah. And of course, here's a picture of Walt Disney with him. And a lot of people show the other picture, which is, but if you look at this picture first, and you see he's talking with the scientist and they're doing the program, it's just him doing a photo op as he does. And then you come over, what people usually will show is this picture. Right. And of course, after you're doing it, you're meeting Walt Disney. Of course, you're going to get a photo op with him. Right. This has nothing to do with anything, guys. It really doesn't. At that time, people didn't really understand Operation Paperclip or what was going on with it. People didn't know the man he was, and of course, the whole space race and all the things, all that science fiction stuff that was going on was very popular. This is a completely innocent thing. Just kind of following up with our Walt Disney TFT last week, because we know now that von Braun was a really horrible human. We know this.
Yeah.
And of course, that brings us to the question of, is it okay for the American government, simply for the future of America, to take all of these really monstrous humans who did a lot of horrible things, were given, carte blanche to do whatever they wanted, to bring them over to America in order to simply compete against Russia? And then the next question that comes into my mind, and maybe someone here can give their opinion on it, but the next thing that comes to my mind is this: if this is true, if we have the best scientists for rockets, particularly, von Braun here, the V2 guy, right? Then
Mhm.
how is it that the Soviets beat us to space? And then once beating us to space, how is it that they ended up not bothering to go to the moon? And of course, this also brings up another TFT we could easily do, which of course Operation Fishbowl, and all those things that went on with that, the bluegill, starfish, get the kingfish project as well. I don't know where it is; it's in here somewhere. But these things also bring up a lot of interesting conversations of what was America and Russia doing, and of course the flat Earth people come into this as well. It's quite interesting how much of the flat Earth can tie into this conversation. Oddly enough, but
No.
why is that? Why did the Russians get into space before we did? We're supposed to have the best rocket team. How did this happen? And we threw all kind of money at it. I mean, all kind of money, but yet the Russians beat us to it. Anyone have an opinion on that?
Well, they took more of the German scientists than we did. They took 6,000 individuals, where we took 1,600 individuals.
Hmm.
So, and we took
Wow.
of the 6,000, we took more of the leader project heads, but not a lot of the technician, which the German, not the German, but the Soviet Union did, which
Makes
the
sense.
Soviet Union understood the minutia, where the scientists we got knew the whole overlay. So it's basically you got the concept designers, we got the concept designer, but they got the actual engineers that know the minutia inside, and we're able to reverse engineer quickly.
No, that's a fair point. Yeah.
There's something I want to add, because I really don't, I don't really want to sit here and do nothing, but I really don't have, uh, I didn't do any research. So we can't, we have no idea what it feels like to be oppressed, right? So if you're sitting here thinking, oh, I'm hearing Nazi, hearing scientists, and that, and thinking, oh, that was a bad guy. Well, who's to say he wasn't a really good guy, but felt so oppressed, so forced into a situation that he just went along to get along? We don't know
Yeah.
what that feels like. We live in times where, you can look around and see how the African American community is acting to, reacting to certain pressures in Baltimore and things like that. You get the idea of, man, how do I survive? And maybe the only way to survive because it's either force, right? Maybe some of these people were forced into their positions with the Nazi Party, or they just went along to get along, or maybe, people have to survive in other ways. Maybe that's where the money was.
Well,
You know,
yeah,
you
no,
can't throw this blanket of negativity over something because
well,
it had a bad leader and a bunch of bad villains involved.
we
You
can
know,
though. We can though, Todd. Because this might well be true for the lower level guys, whether you're saying that they were forced in the situation or simply monetary reasons. I get your point.
Right.
But these upper end guys, which is most everybody, we took it from America. We took the high end guys. All of those guys were Nazi party members, and they were happily so. And we have lots of evidence. It was brought up particularly by Linda Hunt, and then it was followed up by another lady. Like what's her name, Jackie or something like that. There's another reporter who followed up and did a big 2 or 3 books, I think, on the subject. But we know that these guys were full on
Uh,
happy Nazis,
Annie
happy
Annie
Nazis.
Jacobson.
Annie Jacobson, there you go. But
Yeah.
Well,
yeah,
what about the story of Schindler, though? Right? So Schindler exactly is the type of guy that Todd's talking about here,
yeah,
because he is in this upper echelon. He is a corporate person. He has to go along, otherwise you get killed. There's a lot of generals and there were a lot of other politician types that if you didn't go along with the Nazi Party, they just killed you.
sure. But you do
So it's
realize
possible,
conspiracy
and
theory. Yeah, go ahead. Go. I'm sorry. Go
and
ahead.
let's consider this particular aspect of Werner von Braun. Going on this point, I've been sitting on this for several minutes now. This idea,
Hmm.
but he gets over here, like you were saying, and he starts talking to people the likes of Disney and stuff, and they put him in charge of projects. And you said he was hanging Jews in order to get the others to work faster.
Yeah,
So now you get him involved in a manufacturing or a scientific endeavor, and he says, "Okay, what's our setup? What are we going to do? Okay, well, how are we going to make people work more?" Right? And they're going to look at him and they're going to say, "You know what we do? We make sure they have a good coffee break, a good smoke break." Back then, it'd be a smoke break.
sure.
This is going to be an absolutely different change in his process, in his thinking. It's freedom that allows people to work and come up with the endeavors. And maybe the Soviets, not only did they know the minutia of the actual workings of the rockets, but maybe they were pushed harder
That's
versus
true.
us,
Yeah.
where we were trying, but we kind of had the ability to kick back. You know, which leads me to something you also said about them not going to the moon. The Soviets actually did get to the moon. They had the capabilities of getting to the moon, but they just got there after. So what they did was they pulled back. They said, "We're not going to mention it because Americans did it first. We're just going to make like we never really were even trying." See, they were trying and stuff. So and then what that does is it takes it away, right? It's kind of the sour grapes concept. So no, we're not trying to go there at all. We're trying to do something else. So
Yeah.
they diverted what the space race really was, even though they put landers on the far side. because on the far side is where all the cool aliens are. But
That's true. That's true. But you do. I just wanted to make a quick mention, though. You do realize there are conspiracy theorists who suggest that Schindler's List was a smokescreen against the Operation Paperclip, right?
oh, it's cool.
Yeah.
I didn't
Meaning it's
know.
a
I hadn't
conspiracy
heard any of
theory
that.
itself, right? But
Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah,
nice.
The other thing I wanted to bring to the table was uh, every single astronaut in the history of Hollywood cinema has been strapped in to the chair by a guy named Gunther. Why is that?
conspiracy theories abound.
That's how we want to portray certain people.
I guess so. I guess a Gunther is a German who straps people in. Oh my. Uh, all right, let me catch up with the chat real quick, and I'll let Denali continue. Let's see here.
Right.
Joe
Well,
says,
there was a Gunther Hissel
mhm.
in the Rocketeer department, so they might be talking about him, about that individual.
Yeah, maybe he's a really good guy, very popular. Maybe that's why. But anyway, Joe says for Rand's screenplay, he's talking about Anne Rand. She had written a question for Oppenheimer. And what happened to Otto Hahn? Did scientists really fear German success and consider it a race, or were they, I assume he means Jewish success, or were they contemptuous of the German efforts? Or maybe he put it the way he wanted to. After her interview with Oppenheimer, she would end up using him as the model for Robert Stadler in Atlas Shrugged. Interesting, Joe. Let's see. Ghost of Henry says, "Hello there. There's a YouTuber called Curious Mark that fully restored a lunar module computer to function and documented it in a video. It's interesting to watch." Cool. Thanks, Ghost. Let me see here. You guys did Disney last week. So Frozen Head or no? No, definitely no Frozen Head. He was cremated, dude. Eric Hawkins says the Russians got to space, realized the Earth was flat, and there was no moon. Huh. That would be the fun way to look at it. Ghost of Henry continues, says there's a video that explains why the Soviets didn't get to the moon. To sum it up, it was because of politics. Possibly. And there was some shifting in the political scene, major shifting in the political scene at that time as well in the Soviet Union. That's a good point. Joey says, Rand writes about Lisa Meitner escaping Germany, goes to Denmark, and explaining her solution about the atom splitting in half to Otto Frisk, who tells Bohr, who goes to the States. Interesting. Of course, I don't know the time play in that, but of course that would had to been well before the war was over. Matthew says back then they just smoked while working. Not in a clean lab, they didn't. Everyone is smoking in that old control room footage. True, but true. Okay, I'll leave it at that. Exactly. Joe says Chester Rand meant nuclear race, not Jewish race. Oh, okay, yeah, all right. There you go. All right, I'm caught up. But interesting points, guys. Very interesting. Go ahead, Denali.
All right, so continue with von Braun. He worked with another scientist teammate from his old Nazi day, which is Kurt H. DeBus, and I believe you have a picture of him.
It's up.
Showing up right now.
I'm showing it right now.
He's
the old Nazi days. Is that what we're referring it?
The old
Nazi
days.
days. Yes.
Yes.
Ah, yes.
The old Nazi days. Where people were brainwashed. There was a psychological study about this because one psychologist wanted to know, why did the German people follow the ravings of a madman, so to speak, and a lot of the German guards, the Nazi guards, said we were following orders, and it's that infamous test where they strapped a person in to one table, and they said, I'll tell you to turn the knob and you'll hear pain on the other side. And almost everybody, all the participants, turned the knob to deadly. Fortunately, there was nobody else on the other side, but just following that authoritative commands, people instinctively just go with it, kind of deal, to prove anybody could do it as well.
Well, and you also have to keep in mind the rise of Hitler was a perfect storm. right? I mean,
Mhm.
you had the Germans were horribly mistreated by the British, particularly in the treaty, and the reparations and things they were having to do were just totally killing the German society, and it was completely unfair, especially if you go back and look at World War I and see it was actually Britain who instigated and caused the whole damn thing, even though they blame the Germans. But of course, the British do this all the time. It's what they do well. They instigate and create war. But that's a whole conversation for another day, I guess.
Right.
But the German people were suffering horribly, and this voice coming up saying, "Hey, we don't have to suffer anymore. This is ridiculous. We're being oppressed. We need to do something." Now he did pick the Jews. He could have picked the other options, I suppose, but he picked the Jews, and this is another thing people don't understand with the Jews, and particularly the Zionists. They were hated everywhere. Everywhere. Europe and America, the Jews have always been hated for a very long time. We can go back to the Medici era, and they were still hated. And it's because, and it's not without reason. It's not like sitting there saying, "Oh, people just hate the Jews and pick on them because of racism." No, the Jews create their own damn situation throughout history because they tend to be the ones that have a lot of the money. And I've had this conversation when we go back to the Hyksos and Akhenaten's fleeing of Egypt and all the gold they took out. No, because dude, they walked out with the entire gold of Egypt. Where do you think all this money from the overall Jewish community is coming from, right? And but the thing that they did was usury. Because it wasn't that they were just having banks and lending people money, but they were way over the interest rates were way high. So a lot of people were indebted to the Jews, dude. It was an easy target for Adolf to choose because everyone kind of hated him already because of their practices. And the Jews have been doing this for a long time, dude. Now, is it all Jews? Of course it's not. It's the rich top elite types that cause these troubles. It was a clever a group for him to attack and kind of try to rally around because what they represented to the German people was the outside influence, particularly the British influence of holding them down and oppressing them and taking their money, right? And it was just a perfect storm that led us to this. And of course, as the time went
Well,
by,
hold on,
yeah.
hold on. So, so how did that relate to the Germans?
It related to the
Skip ahead a little
Germans.
bit.
It was related to the Germans because the Jews were the ones who controlled most of the banking, and the Germans were already in a difficult situation because of all the reparations they had to pay out from the treaty they had established after World War I, and a lot of people were indebted to the Jews anyway. So it was an easy outsider group that was seen to be attached to the money stations of the world, the money centers of the world. Of course, at that time was London, and it was easy for them to focus on that. Now, did every German hate Jews? No. Of course not. Did every Jew have anything to do with it? Of course they didn't. Like I said, it was the elite, but it was an easy target for Hitler to choose upon. And understand, in the beginning, it wasn't all about let's murder them. It was like kick them out of our country. As time went by, things became more and more dark and more brutal. Right? It didn't start that way.
Right.
So
Right. Well, because back in that era, though, there wasn't the proliferation of all these different types of varieties of people. And if I'm correct, the Germans they had a lot of that so-called Aryan race, and then there was these also the Mediterranean, Hungarian the gypsy stock, which includes Jewish stock in
mhm.
there too. So yeah, it was easy to say, hey, they're not us,
Right.
and that's all they really were. Just like
Yeah.
when the Irish came to America in droves, the Irish were condemned for a while, and then the
A long
Poles
time.
were and
Yeah.
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 whatnot. Yeah,
Yeah, good point.
Right.
But
And
it also the other is certainly a good point, but it also comes back to the money. Go ahead, Danelli.
I was gonna say, and a lot of these talks are for educational and discussion purposes only. Just put that disclaimer out there.
Caveats. Well,
Yeah.
dude, it's a fair argument. Why have the Jews have been hated throughout history? Why? It can't
well,
be.
but it's a different argument
It is a different argument. Yeah.
than
Yeah.
Operation Paperclip.
Yeah. Yeah. So
But it's
that's
related to
another.
how we got there. It is related to
Right.
exactly how we got because Adolf Hitler made a decision to choose the most significant and easily disliked other group within the society to blame them and to use them as a scapegoat for all their frustrations against Britain. Right, and that's what happened. But I'm just saying, as things went along, is when it really got ugly. It didn't start that bad. in the beginning. But it got really bad, right? But that's what
And
Well,
then
gave
we
us
got a
the
bunch of their
Nazis,
scientists.
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And then that's the problem is we then collected a bunch of their scientists, which of
Uh-huh.
course, Denali went and told us that the Russians got 5 times as many,
Hmm.
or
Oh yeah,
workers, people in those programs.
And
Yeah,
their families as
yeah,
well.
which was smart, right? But I mean, even this guy right here, that Denali, of course, is has his picture of here. Um,
Kurt
uh,
H. DeBus,
yeah,
the first
Dubus.
director of Kennedy Space Center, and also the overseeing the whole V rocket and launch of Apollo 11 as well.
Right, but let me add a little interesting point. You
Hmm.
see on this guy, these guys all went to boarding schools. They were rich kids, and they became, into universities and studied and became scientists, et cetera, et cetera. But these guys, if you go back and you take a look, and I'm going to credit Joe Rogan with this because Joe Rogan actually covered this pretty interestingly. But if you look at the scar on his chin, look at this scar and you go back and check out the history of dueling scars. At that time in Germany, a lot of these scientists you see, they all have these scars in the same kind of area in their face, and they would not only when they were intentionally wanting to get scars on their face, but they would take like horsehair and they put it into the cut so that the scar would be bigger and wider because it was like a prestige point from their point of view. And it's shocking when you go back and check how many of these Operation Paperclip scientists have these same facial scars, right? Because they were all part of that society, that group, and that's dark, right? There were a lot of dark things going on in Germany. It wasn't just the anti-Jew stuff. It was other things, and it had built up over time since World War I because of they were so. Oppressed and being pushed down by the Europeans, and they were in destitute situations, and it created a lot of these dark ideas and dark cultural points that were going on in the culture. And I think it's a very interesting study into what can happen to a society when it's being put in this kind of position, right?
yeah. I think cult is what you're looking for.
Yeah, yeah, no, no, no. It's a fair point. Yeah, go ahead, Denali.
Right. So as you can see, the gentleman right here is behind our JFK and LBJ, uh, President Johnson as well. So, I mean, these guys were talking to our presidents, to our congressmen, to know what they were using their money for. Interesting enough, Von Braun in the summer of, what was it, 1966, 67, um, participated to a field trip to Antarctica
Hmm.
with the
What?
goal, yeah, with other several top member of NASA management, which included this gentleman between the two presidents, to to explore the wastelands to see if it's useful for crew exploration of space. Part of that scientific effort in Antarctica is research station, logistic, habitation, and life supports. Hmm, the perfect cover for perfect setup for whatever is there that the government doesn't want us to know. Just
Or
saying.
it's just a really good place to practice for
Yeah,
building a colony on the moon.
exactly. Well, that too. I'm just saying if we're going TFT, I'll throw that little conspiracy theory as well. Um, and then he moved it from NASA and became head of the Apollo application program in Huntsville as well.
Mm.
Um, it's kind of interesting. He also was the one who developed the idea for space camp to train kids in the fields of space and science technology. So, hey, parents, you take your kids to space camp. Know that it was founded by major of a former major of the Nazi regime.
Yeah, and do keep in mind that these guys, these level guys, they were buddies with Adolf. They weren't just pet members of the Nazi Party. They were personal friends of Adolf Hitler, right? And let's see. Ghost of Henry says that scar thing started much earlier, back in the 1800s. I think you're probably right. But I seem to remember reading something on it where the artists in class, which of course became the scientists, started trying to emulate things they saw the elite doing. And I'd have to do more research in it, but you're probably right, dude. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they were the elite after World War One
Yeah,
happens,
that's true.
which
Yeah.
is which is what you were talking about with the representation. And it's not just the London that did it; it was France, it was every other ally party,
Oh, sure. They
kind of
all went along with it. Yeah. Yeah.
excluding the United States. I add, which we kind of said don't do that, and we also said we should build a UN, and they did the League of Nations, and they invite the United States, and it fell apart again, which proves that we were right
Yeah.
twice.
Well, you also have to keep in mind that another thing that was kind of worrisome for them was the fact that before we got into the war, which the attack on Pearl Harbor is a whole nother conspiracy theory we could talk about. But
Hmm.
uh, if you went and looked at the sentiment in America, most Americans were supporting the Germans actually. During the 30s. And that's an odd
Yep.
thing because Hollywood shows you something very different. Hollywood always wants you to show you the Jesse Owens and all that kind of stuff, but that's not the temperature of the country. The people in America felt because we always see ourselves as David. We are actually in truth the Goliath, but we've always
Hmm.
seen ourselves as David. And we saw the Germans as being put down and oppressed by the Europeans, and we didn't think it was cool. A lot of Americans supported Germans being left out of that, lifted out of that treaty and being allowed to move forward. And they
Well,
don't ever talk about that, dude. They always show America
yeah,
as being very anti-Nazi. It's not true at all.
yeah. There's a definite break in there, which was before Pearl Harbor and after Pearl Harbor. Before
Oh
Pearl
yeah.
Harbor, most people were sentimental. You can actually see old um, time movies, silent film movies, little commercial cartoons, and all that that was in support of the German regime. And a lot of people were very persuaded with the German words of Adolf Hitler.
Yeah.
It's after Pearl Harbor that we became nationalistic and say, okay, you messed up the wrong buddy. And that's where
Yeah,
the whole propaganda
It's
came
true.
out to be.
Yeah.
that was the invasion of the mountains of Czechoslovakia, um, the nice steel-rich area of Austria, and it was more tactically done by Hitler. By that point, he wasn't invading large areas. He took the Rhineland, right, where this is just German people. This should be German land, and it's been kept from us. So yeah, in that regard, yeah, America, a lot of other people, even Europe, just said, "Well, okay, we'll let you do that."
Well,
Right?
especially
It didn't. It
because they
didn't
didn't.
tip. It didn't tip off until Poland.
Yeah, but see, they didn't annex Austria, dude. Austria rejoined them for willingly, dude. There was no annexation going on in there at all. And this is one of the things that Americans were seeing was these German lands that were some in France and some in Poland and
They were
Austria.
willing. Yes, they were willing. Wink, wink.
No, no, they were, dude. We have documentation, dude. And this is the thing that's been completely clouded over by the media. One of the things Americans were very supportive of was the fact that all these lands they were begging to come home, and we were very supportive of them going home. That was there was a big movement in America. People like to point out Preston Bush, about George's grandpa, and say he worked for the Nazis and he sold the weapons. Yeah, well, so what? A lot of Americans were doing that kind of stuff because they were supporting Germany becoming whole again. This is something that people don't understand. A lot of people point to the invasion of Austria. There was no invasion. That was a happy reunion. That wasn't a march into the Austrian city of Vienna. That was a parade. And this is how much
Right.
they've twisted
You,
history, dude.
you got to remember that Adolf Hitler was from Austria, so he was returning back home, and Austria was part of the Austro-German Empire that was just broken up
Hmm.
after World War One.
That's
Now
right.
they did invade Poland; it was true, and the Polish people did not like that.
He sent troops
Mhm.
into Austria
Yeah,
and then annexed.
yeah,
That's different. Now they didn't fire a shot because the Austrians just went, "Oh, okay," and you only want a part of Austria. And
yeah.
I'm talking about there's a border area. That's what he militarily took first, and then the latter annexation happened because of the additional pressure that he put on them. And then they willingly went, and they thought that Germany, of course, was going to be nice to them, and everything was going to be hunky
Right.
dory afterwards.
Yeah. Which history's hindsight, they probably would have been fighting to the teeth
Yep.
if they knew what was.
Everyone wasn't loving the Germans and the
Yeah.
Nazi Party as much as Chester was.
No, no.
Yeah, no,
See,
no, no.
once again, you're misrepresenting it, dude. That's not at all what happened. What actually happened was, at the behest of the British government, the French had troops that they had pushed down through the adjoining lands and were on the border because Austria and many of these other old German places were talking about coming back in. And they were trying to put pressure on them, threatening them to don't you dare do it, right? And of course, Hitler brought the military down at the behest of the Austrian government to countermand what the French were doing. Actually, there was
Okay,
no, it was a completely happy reunion, dude. There was no
okay.
pressure from Germany whatsoever. The Austrians were happy to return,
I
and
I
the
think we
media has absolutely bastardized this over the intervening
okay.
8 decades, dude.
Well, I think we need a little bit more research on this topic, but we're moving a little bit far from beyond the
But
topic of paper
yes,
gun. Yeah.
and I will concede that point to
Hmm.
give you the reason why Operation Paperclip is then the conspiracy theory that it is. And I know
Yeah.
I really want Denali to be able to go further into what he's going here, but
Hmm.
because of this fact of how the Nazis are able to politically sway people, the fact that Werner von Braun and 15,000 or plus
Hmm.
15,000, that's okay.
16,000.
That's a bit much there. Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, I thought it was 1,600. Oh
16.
well, it's
Yeah.
just numbers. Who
Yeah.
cares?
It's a lot of
All these
number.
all these Nazis and scientists then are there. Are they able to then manipulate our society from the politics, from the
Hmm.
scientists, from the rocket fields, and other fields too? Some of these guys were chemical engineers. We know what they did with chemicals, and were they able to then manipulate us so that we became a new version of the Nazi Party? And that's exactly what concept of how they rose there. Did they secretly rise again in America and were being covertly led by them now, a
Right.
la Hydra,
Hydra.
Well,
Winter
Yeah.
Soldier?
Very
I,
good
I had
point.
well,
I had to get
Yeah.
it in here,
yeah.
Yeah.
a la
Sure.
Well,
Hydra and the development of Shield, and of course
yeah.
Shield we know developed the Saturn V rocket.
That's right.
Right.
There you go.
Well, I will point out, DeWolf, earlier in my presentation, in 1949, CIA created the Office of Scientific Intelligence, which is shorthand OSI, as you would know as the precursors of SHIELD,
Right.
and they were formed for the express purpose of creating the Manchurian Candidate
Yeah.
and the MK Ultra program.
Yeah.
Wait,
Those
isn't
were
the Manchurian Candidate the Winter Soldier?
yes.
Yes, oh, exactly.
Oh,
That's
right,
exactly
right,
what he
okay.
is. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, you're right.
I
Shield,
just want to be on the same
Hydra.
page as you.
I'm
Okay.
with you, dude. I'm with you. But the
Yeah.
reason why I was getting into all that stuff was
Mhm.
actually kind of lay the groundwork of why a lot of people in the American government would have been very supportive of the idea of bringing Germans in because there was already sympathy from the beginning. Now things got way out of hand, and as time went by,
Mhm.
more and more came out. Sure, but I'm trying to build the groundwork of how well, the reason that got there. Like for instance, Ghost is talk about how Henry Ford gave a bunch of money to the German Nazi Party. He did. We also have people like Hungary was their first ally. He's mentioning. You have, of course, Prescott Bush was the one who was bankrolling, amongst others. You also had
Mm.
the Morgan family was putting a lot of money in there as well. But my point was, and it comes back to what something you said to Wolf, right? Because you talked about how when the Irish first came to America, they were horribly oppressed and disliked. They're drunken mix, and they were. But it was also, you have to remember those waves of migrations. There was a big German wave as well. And all of them have gone through the time of trying to make their way and find their footing in the United States of America. And they did as time went by. But there was a lot of German immigrants and Irish immigrants, or the children of, or the grandchildren of, that had this sentimentality in their head, and this is why things hit the Operation Paperclip. They probably didn't even take they didn't probably didn't even blink because there was already sympathy for the idea of it. Is the point I'm trying to make?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, even colonially, right? The Hessians were here.
Yeah,
The English used them as mercenaries, and they
that's
were
right.
here. Germans then were there during the colonial times. You're right. World War One. Then you had Germany in its state, huge migration.
Hmm.
My wife's grandfather, he spoke German still, and as an ambulance driver, they were able to drive up, and he was able to talk to the Germans, the Nazis at the checkposts, and they would let him warm up in the back, give him some diesel fuel, and they were able to then move troops, wounded soldiers in and out of German checkpoints because he actually spoke German. He was one of them,
Sure.
so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right. So, and I saw in the comments from Joe saying about the other reason why the Jewish people community were disliked as well is because they couldn't own land, which is true part of the whole Christian thing, which is the Jewish people couldn't own property, but they couldn't be taxed. That's how they made their money and interest because they couldn't do any trades or any work that the good Christian people could do.
Hmm.
So it's always that religious friction that was going between the
Sure.
Christian and the Christian population resented the Jewish people because, unlike the Christian, the Jewish were non-exempt from taxes as well. So that's how they amassed their fortunes in that area as well.
Yeah, but you
Pointing
also
that
have
out.
to, you also that then you have to ask the question of why did these laws come into play? Right? Why were they put on the
Right.
books to begin with? And of course, it has to do with the big land grabs the Jews were doing after the Reconstruction in Europe, dude. If you go, this is a fair conversation actually. We can't have it because it's just like you can't talk about the difficulties in the black community in America and how and all the troubles they're having and what they need to do. Because if you do, you're a racist when it's a fair conversation, right? Because why is it the Jews have been hated for century upon century? There is reasons behind it, but we can't talk about it, especially in Europe. If you talk about those things, the Zionists who have their fingers in every little bit of government over there will literally arrest you. Right? It's outrageous nonsense, and it continues. And the Jews wonder why they keep getting hated throughout history. It's because of this shit that they do. That's why they're elite. They keep causing their own
Whoa.
problems, dude.
So with Operation Paperclip, were the Jews
Mhm.
involved in Operation
They
Paperclip at
were.
all?
No, there were a lot of Jews worked in
Oh.
NASA actually.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay.
I think
Good.
we have
Yes.
I think we have a picture of one of I was just showing earlier actually. Anyway, go
Yeah.
ahead, Janelle, continue.
So yeah, no. So just finishing up, um, his von Warner SS number was 1,800 or 1,085 100 185,068. His Nazi party number was 5,738,992. Just to remind that portion, he did contributed a lot. He founded the University of Alabama.
Hmm.
Oh,
Um,
and I have a question, Denali. Did you
mhm.
say that was his Nazi party number or his social
Yes.
security number?
No, the Nazi
Oh,
party
okay.
the
All right.
number, and then his actually SS number, not social security, the uh SS number. But I get the joke as well.
Got you. Got you. Okay,
Yeah,
all right. I'm sorry to interrupt. That just was interesting.
yeah. So no, I mean, does all the technological? Here's the question that becomes with looking at we can look at every Nazi Germany scientists that we were able to help. Do their achievement of bettering man balance out to the horrors that they inflicted on their fellow man as well? And that's really what boils down to it. Are we able? Do we carry these sins because we accept the technology, the infrared, the radar, the medical technology that we take of benefit? We always say that everything that NASA produces and bring back and we use as consumerism, that is built on the minds of Nazi scientists. Are we bearers of those sins for
Yeah,
accepting that technology?
the sins of the father. Yeah, that's a very good point.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And
um there was also the ear thermometer was developed during this time frame.
mhm.
Various rubbers that you just laugh, guys, that were better able to be used for various different products. Um, and then of course the magnetized tape, which was used to store data. I mean, that's like floppy disks. That's what eventually Werner von Braun's brainwaves got put in a bunker, over a massive facility.
That's right.
Um,
Mhm.
and then of course, no run hosiery, which I think is one of the more important advents that came
Yeah.
out of the Operation Paperclip.
That was a lot of tech, dude. I mean, you also think about Zyklon A. Of course, what most people talk about is Zyklon B because, but the interesting thing that was created by a Jewish fellow who actually, when he created it, was of course a pesticide originally. And
Mhm.
Zyklon A, he added odor to it to make sure you could smell it because it's so deadly. The Germans then took it. The German scientists then took it and made Zyklon B, which is exactly the same, except for they took the odor that he added out so that they wouldn't know they were being poisoned. But that the Zyklon A, of course, it became a basis for a lot of pesticides and stuff we have today. There are a lot of technologies that came out of the Operation
Yeah.
Paperclip that had nothing to do with NASA, and that's or space travel. That's
Yeah, and
like
not
Velcro.
necessarily associated, not necessarily associated with it is the medical advances, right? Because they
Mhm.
found all of these test subjects for medical experiments, done by the doctors on the Jewish people. Now, I don't
Mhm.
think that's necessarily Operation Paperclip related, but like you said, that's the sins of the fathers concept. Is it okay for us to use the, what was discovered, for advances and betterment of human society from something that was so dark and grisly?
Yeah. Well, and it brings up the overall conversation about sins of the father, actually, right? But just a real quick point here. Eric Hawkins says Chester is reminding me of Mel Gibson. Lol. I get it, dude. And then we get the Owen Benjamin joke as well. But I get that. I get the humor behind it. But think about how indoctrinated you've become that we can't even talk about Zionists, who aren't all Jews, who cause a lot of trouble. And we can't talk about it because you're so indoctrinated that you automatically like, oh my God, what is he saying? This is a problem, dude. We should be able to have an open conversation about anything, good or bad, and look at it for what it is, right? And I think that's a problem. And when we talk about sins of the father, we're getting at this. This applies directly to the life we have today, right? Look at all the nonsense that's going on with the progressives in the West, because everything they're complaining about, and they yell and scream, and of course they can't have an argument; they'll just scream and point Nazi at you. But all these arguments we're having are about the sins of the father. Sometime in my ancient past, some people who might have lived near my family had slaves, and therefore I am somehow responsible simply because I'm white. It's always comes down to the sins of father, and screw that. I'm not responsible for anything my ancestors did. I'm only responsible for myself. Because if you want to start playing that game, boy, we can play that game, and that'll get real ugly, and then everyone's going to
Sure
owe
will.
everybody everything, right?
Yep, that is
So
true.
All right.
I have
And
Polish roots, so
there you go. And Poland was not blameless. They played, and of course, once again, it comes back to the British, but they played a big part in
shut
that
your
thing.
mouth.
Well, no, dude, they played a big part in that turning into a full-on war. They did, and
by
people don't
by
want to talk about
being
that either.
invaded by other countries.
No,
You're
dude,
right. You're right,
that's
Chester.
not what happened, dude. That is
From
not
both
what
the
happened. The
Bolsheviks
Prussia.
as well as the Germans.
Dude, Prussia was far away. They couldn't get there by sea because they were all the sea lanes were being patrolled, and they weren't allowed to do those kind of things. And they were desperately trying to help the Prussian people because the Polish were intentionally keeping those Germans down, whether it be political or just simple cultural reasons. And they refused to do it. The Germans actually offered to pay lots of money just to run trains in to bring them food and water, and they wouldn't. So Hitler decided, well, fine, I'm going to start sending planes and landing them in Prussia, bringing food and water to our people, right? And what did the Polish start doing? They started shooting at those damn planes.
La
The
la la
Germans
la
did
la
not
la la la.
shoot first. They did not, dude. And then they kept doing that, and the Germans were like, fine, screw it. And they invaded Poland. Right, so I mean, you can blame the Germans all you want, but you cannot take Poland out of the equation because they were the ones that were instigating the hell out of that, dude. They were.
Hitler took Poland out of the equation.
He did. That's exactly what he did. He took him out of the equation. Yeah. But I'm just saying
Right.
that they
So
have some
anyway,
responsibility.
moving on
yeah.
before I get triggered.
Oh, goodness.
Oh
That
boy. Well, that ends my presentation
was
for
a good one, though.
now.
Good job, Dinelli. That was a good one.
Hmm.
Yeah. Eric says, I agree with you, Chester. We should be able to talk about anything. But you're also correct in that we aren't supposed to anymore. Yeah, and I think it's complete nonsense, dude. I mean, because we should be able to look at a situation and understand the good and the bad of it. We should. Because if we look at the, in this case, because you guys are getting triggered because I'm talking about the Jews, there's a lot of good things we could talk about the Jews that they've done over the centuries, and a lot of the creations, inventions, stories. I mean, all kind of stuff. The Jews have given a lot to the societies around them. They most certainly have, but they also have a certain element in amongst them for the past few centuries, particularly the Zionists, that are extremely troublesome. And understand that all Jews are not Zionists. It's a certain group with them. It's the same thing with the Muslims. Most Muslims are good people. They're just like us. But there is a terroristic Islamic group within them who are absolutely vicious and destructive. And we can find this example in almost any society in the world, right? And that's one of the things that came up in today's conversation. The sins of the father also goes back to looking at what the American government was doing at the time. And they were doing some pretty nasty stuff, dude. And the only reason no one doesn't talk about it is because everything gets thrown on the Germans, right? So I mean, every culture has their dark side to it. I think is what it comes down to it, and I'm not responsible for it. Are you responsible, DeWolf? He is.
No.
He's taken. No, he's not. Right? None of us. We're not responsible for what the nasty things that have been done in the past, even if it's an ancestor. Right? Like there was this doctor. It's not Kevorkian, it's a different one. But there was a doctor who did a bunch of really nasty stuff, and he ended up escaping to Argentina. He actually got acquitted by The Hague, which is kind of ridiculous. But this lady, what was her name? Annie. Oh, what was her name?
Jake,
Denali?
Jacobson.
Annie Jacobson. She actually went over to Germany and she did an interview with his son or grandson, and that dude had a literal Nazi doctor burden on his shoulders, right? And he had to live with that his whole life, and of course he ended up turning over a lot of material to her, which made a couple of her books, I think. But the thing is, why should he have to have that burden? What did he have to do with it? Nothing. Just because his father or his grandfather was an absolute ass? It's not cool, dude.
Yeah, we all find ourselves in different situations due to our ancestry,
Mm,
but of course we're all supposed to take wherever we're at, and I mean golden rule, right?
yeah. No,
You
it's
want
true.
make the world a better place around you, treat everybody good, etc., etc. Yeah,
Yeah, do
period.
unto others as you'd have them do unto you, dude. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, yeah. So in Operation Paperclip, though, that also there was a lot of things going on, right? That America has done consistently behind the scenes, and of course that's what TFT is about. Including the men who stared at goats,
That's right.
right?
Yeah,
The psychic phenomena going on during the Cold War, which I could almost even go back to the concepts of Operation Paperclip. I'm sure there was some concepts of some of the people there trying to do well. Of course, I mean, come on, think of what Hitler was doing with the whole
yeah,
Hmm.
um, the cult, like the arc, spiritual Longinus, and all things like that.
sure. Yeah. And of course, Dinale mentioned that actually. He was talking about the what is that project that he's talking about staring at ghosts? I forget the name of it. It starts with an M.
MK
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 Ultra.
Ultra.
Ultra. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
actually, it was a different project. Really, it was, but
Oh, sure.
that's a different show. But it still goes back to that fact, and I'm gonna drive this home: is whether or not the political system was able to be changed, and should we be outraged by Operation Paperclip because we were using, Nazis, and the fact that it was hidden also, right? And not just hidden from our enemies because you don't want the Soviets to know what we're doing because by that at that point, Cold War, that was a different world. There was a lot of stuff going on. Um, where we were on the edge of war. Cuban Missile Crisis came much later in there.
Hmm.
Actually, no, no, not much later, just a little bit later. In part in all of this. So so is it okay to have these people who were Nazi? Do you have to say anything else? Nazi. And while we're using their technology, we're advancing our culture, and we're fighting another type of war moving forward, and keeping it secret, not just from our enemies, but from our own people. And that's where it riles Americans up.
Sure. That's right. Good
Right.
point. Yeah.
And just to always put this caveat, all these conversations for educational and discussion purposes only. You
Good
can
boy.
find a lot of this information in www.cia.gov. Thank you, the Information Act.
Mhm. Yeah.
Continue.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I get it. It's that indoctrination again. You gotta have put caveats in because Chester dared to use the word Jew. Oh my God. But
Yeah.
anyway, I'm gonna do a show one day talking about the 12 tribes. We should do that
Yeah. Yeah.
actually.
And all this still goes right back to, and we have the ability, and we've been doing it the whole show. I've been doing it the whole show, is comparing it to Winter Soldier is a real big one, right?
Yeah.
At what
Hmm.
point does our NASA turn into Hydra? And are we waiting for, or CIA for that matter, turn into Hydra, where the embeddedness, the embedded knowledge, or possibly the way of thinking of Nazism, does it come out? And does it say, okay, now we're going to grab a hold of you? And I think luckily at that time frame, they integrated into our way of life. They saw where freedoms and the ability to
Mm,
maintain families, and not without a gun pointed to your head, was actually the way of living, and having a model society could be America, which leads into a whole new discussion on, throughout the 50s and throughout the Cold War, is the model society that America has become, is it something that which was founded, with the founding concepts, and where are we at now as we get closer and closer to people saying we need to change the Constitution because our society is changing, government controls and all that? Is it now modeling fascism and Nazism?
good point. Glad to have you back, DeWolf. I love having your counterpoint. It's always awesome. And Ghost Henry says, "You mean 13 tribes?" Oh, that's good. That's a TFT show right there, dude.
Oh, that's true. Whoa, good job goes to
Goodness.
Henry.
Yeah, good point. And I love how you bring it back to the comics as well, because I mean, a lot of the comic book stories are kind of making subtle little political points like that. They are. And it's cool. It's not like we're the first person, the people to think about these things. They've been discussed for quite a while. Even before Linda Hunt came out with her big expose, which kind of blew the lid off of Operation Paperclip. There was plenty of conversations about that kind of stuff. But I guess in the end, the question I asked, continuing from what DeWolf said, are we better off because of them? You know, is America better because we brought in these, 6,000 or whatever the number was, German scientists? Are we better for it?
I mean,
Yeah,
it depends on your definition of better. If you say we progress technology wise, where we can reach the moon, where we build supercomputer, where we have the internet, where we have all these marvel of technology, where infrared, the MIR, the
MRI, yes.
yeah, sorry, MRI, excuse me, the CAT scan, and all those medical marvels that's been coming out um,
Yeah.
from those process.
Plastics, rubbers, Velcro, all kind of stuff, dude. Yeah.
If you say that's betterment, then yes, we have bettered ourselves. If it says that this age of consumerism has led us from the least righteous path into a more depraved path because we're worried too much about material goods and our fellow man, and being a good person and being a moral standing person, as defined by what we're fighting the culture war, then no, we haven't been in the right path, and this is actually regress us in society as well. So
ooh,
it really depends on how you want to move forward with that question and how people will divide it.
Yeah, but do you think that the people who came over in Operation Paperclip, or people who drove us to this ultra liberal, ultra progressive thinking, do you think they were that kind of people? I would suggest they were conservatives, actually.
I don't think I think there's a phrase that the worst people do it for the best intention always ends up the worst action possible.
So you're talking
I don't
about
think.
Cenk Uygur. I get it. I
Yeah,
get it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Like one person got that joke. Damn it. Oh well. I'll have to try harder. Um. Anyway, I
We
think
should
it's
ask George and Todd.
yeah, George. Todd, give us some of your closing opinions on it, George. George, I know
Are we
George
better
was
off?
well.
Well,
George was busy, so
I've
let
been
Todd
busy.
have it.
No, no, hold on. I'm good. I'm good. I'm good.
Well, I've been busy all day, and
Go ahead, George.
Um, all this talk, I mean, really heavy talk, sparks a question that came to mind a while ago. Um, what did the giant say when he ate a pirate rabbi?
Ooh, what did he say, George?
Something salty and a bit Jewish.
Goodness gracious. Uh, Thank you, George. That was helpful. Todd, go ahead, dude.
I can't follow that. There's no way.
Don't.
Yeah, I'm not even going
Uh,
there.
We lost it. Moving on.
But Todd, was Operation Paperclip a success? Was it good and helpful? Was it worthy of being hidden to American life?
Oh, that's a good way to phrase that question because obviously, um, yeah, you know what? There's like you guys mentioned earlier on, there's evildoers here, right? So we grabbed an evildoer who was very knowledgeable about something, and we utilized him to our benefit.
mhm.
Um, it's not the first time. It won't be the last time. It probably happens more than we know.
Yeah.
History books are never accurate. Portrayals of history are never accurate. Um, so you know, there's something to be said about did we further mankind through those pursuits? I would say yes.
Yeah.
You know, as far as like you're talking about medically, yes, absolutely. You know, that's the
Oh,
gist of what
especially medically.
how
Yeah.
I answer that.
It's a
Yeah.
good, yeah, good point. All right, let me just catch up with the chat real quick, and then I'm going to come over to DeWolf, and then we'll have Dinale take us out. So let me see here. Eric Hawkins said, "I thought the golden rule was he who has the gold makes the rules." I might have been have to rethink all this. All right, yeah, dude. Ghost of Henry says, "What I actually want to know is which Nazi actually invented the paperclip." Well, the paperclip was created in the 1860s by a man called Dr. Frey. I can't remember his first name. But Dr. Frey created the paperclip. They're talking about MK Ultra here. Eric Harkin says, Dillard, I went the KI route, but deleted it before I posted it. Lol. Okay, I don't. I guess you guys are making some kind of joke I'm not getting. You mean 13 tribes? Matthew says, NASA, CIA, and NSA are all Hydra. They took control after 9/11, became their final form, Homeland Security. Okay. Uh, he says, now we all carry three mics and two HD cameras everywhere we go. Fair point. Dillard says, Eric, if you censor yourself, the terrorists have won. Good point, Dillard. Matthew continues by saying, right wing and left wing are both on the same two headed eagle. Interesting. That's a German reference there. And Nick says, hi, everybody. Dude, you're a little late. But anyway, interesting question, especially about the paperclip there. Hopefully, I had to have to go look up what his first name was, and I know it's in the 1860s sometime. But Dr. Frey is definitely the dude who created the paperclip. But anyway, DeWolf, give us your final thoughts, dude.
Woo! Yeah. Well, Denali did a great job,
Yeah,
and
he did.
I was waiting to see where if there was anything new I could bring up, but instead of being able to bring up anything new because basically it was covered well, it was being able to add the commentary where it needed to be, which of course is what we do all together. And
Hmm.
I realize now, how much that definitely would leave the vacuum if I was gone. So I appreciate you saying that earlier that you like having me back. I'm going to continue being back as much as possible. And this Operation Paperclip, really, in my opinion, I think yes, it is good if you can take. There was a lot of things that went on in Nazi Germany. A lot of arms were twisted, and people did what they had to do to survive, and it went completely out of control. World of Darkness came about, and
Mm.
then many men stood up and said, "We're just gonna, we have to do something. We have to stop this. This has gone into insanity. Genocide is wrong. This level of war is wrong." And we got to the point of, World War One was the war to end all wars.
Yeah.
We got to World War Two, and we did it. Of course, we did it with great scientific knowledge and power, and that was the nuclear power. And that was on purpose, because we know what happened then when technology has gotten to the reaches that we have gone to now. We recognize the fragility of ourselves and humankind's existence as it sits on Earth, and so we've taken a step back as superpowers, even down to the single man, and said, I have a place here. And I think what has happened, that is where we're at now. We're at another cusp of that, with the shooting that has gone on, to where, are we losing our grasp of our place due to the fact that we do have an HD camera and a microphone in our pockets, and all these other, the technology once again has led us here.
Mhm.
And we're at that point, and we each have to make our own decision on, is the technology, is our life, is it meaningful, and is it good, and is it worth continue on and doing something better for everyone else around us, which of course is what they ended up trying to do with Project Paperclip. So I think, yes, it was a benefit, and we all have to look towards whether or not we're making a benefit in others' lives as well. And I think, if we are going to discuss what we're going to be talking about next, I think Templars keep coming up, even still in the chat, and I think we need to get deep into Templars.
We could. You guys want to do Templars next week? That's an interesting conversation.
Sure.
Yeah. No, I think it sounds fine. Next week, TFT, the Knights Templar. That's a very interesting conversation. You know it. You're going to get me deep, though, dude. You know where I'm going to
Well,
go. You know where I'm going to go, right?
yeah, oh, I don't exactly know. I think I know, but I'm deep in
Yeah,
the
you are.
Templars as
It's a good
well.
conversation
So
for you. That's a fair point.
yeah,
But you are a great counterpoint, dude. I really am happy to have you back. I wasn't kidding. But I think the last, so we'll do Knights Templar next week, guys. But I think a little counterpoint I will add myself here at the end. If we didn't have the Nazis, think about all the great stories and movies we wouldn't have gotten. Because boy, they're the perfect villain.
I think they think they can take over the world because they can do it.
That sounded a bit Mexican. I hope John's not offended.
Yeah, what was that?
It's, John Dillard just took offense. Yeah,
What?
Mexicans have been well.
I
You
guess
do
so.
realize, quick. I don't want to get into it real long, but a real quick thing. That we were really close to Adolf Hitler was doing negotiations with the Mexican government, trying to get them on their side, and we were really close to having Mexico try to invade America. I don't know if you
Yeah,
guys
With
know that.
Yeah.
what?
Yeah,
What were they going to do it with?
Well, that's why they didn't do it because they would have got their asses handed to them. But I'm just saying
Right?
they were in negotiations with the German government.
Throwing
Actually,
tamales and
yeah, tacos. It'd been a
yeah,
tasty war. It'd been a tasty war.
yeah, right.
But anyway, Denali, take us out of here, dude.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us for TFT uh, tonight. It was very interesting. A lot of information was presented, all for educational purposes and discussion purposes only. There's no affiliation one way or the other to any parties that was mentioned, except for the United States of America. God bless it, and all the leaders. um, but as everybody said, no, we have to confront a lot of these dark aspects because as a nation, as a country, that's part of what the Constitution is all about. Um, so, what Chester said at the beginning, this is one of the only nation, begrudgingly, our government does eventually tell the dark aspects of it.
Mhm.
And we do take responsibility and accountability because we look at what our answers do and we strive to do better at the end of the day.
Mhm.
Tomorrow's going to be TN CNT Comics News today at 9 p.m. We're going to be talking about the spoiler review
Mhm.
for The Boys season 1. So
That's
if you
right.
haven't finished watching that, watch it tonight, watch it tomorrow, because we're going to go in-depth spoiler on that. I don't think we're going to talk more news. We're just going to be talking about The Boys for that hour. And if you want to join us, hit Chester up on Twitter, hit us on Facebook. We're growing. We're at 208. Let's see if we can make it at 300 by the end of this month. Make it happen. It'll be fantastic to make our small Facebook community grow. And I thank everybody who's posting in our Facebook fan page, because it shows that you're involved in what we're saying. It's getting you excited enough to, add your comments and stories in there as well. We have a lot of projects going. Check out our show yesterday. We have Insider Magazine. We have IndieCom TV in here. Todd, tell a little bit of that since you're here.
Yeah, Anycom TV is just just start. We haven't had an official launch where everybody's ready to go, but Preston Poulter of Pocket Jacks Comics has put up some great content already, and I'm out recruiting YouTubers. So if you're in this community as a person who loves comics and geekdom and stuff like that, please contact me, because I realize that I have to go outside the box. I got plenty of creators, I got plenty of artists, I got plenty of writers, but I need people who are interested in YouTube. So, hit me up on the DMs, and I really want to have a conversation.
Well, I'm doing a live show for you guys next week, yeah.
Yep. Yes,
Yep,
that's
yep.
right. Chester's involved too. Of course, I will have Chester involved. I also have Todd DeWolf here involved, who does these
Sweet.
great voices, except for German ones.
Um,
There's
it,
my moments. Preston Poulter, by the way, I believe we know him from Guinevere and the Divinity Factory,
Oh, we had
which
him
is
on
a
here for White Lily as well. Yeah, we like Preston,
and
dude.
White Lily, great comic. And if you remember way back when, not only was he interested in putting out the comic book, but he thought there was this great cool idea of having a music video that illuminated the comic book. And so we know that he has some talent in the video field. So
Well,
I'm looking forward to that.
he's actually worked in Hollywood doing scripts and indie films and stuff like that. He's actually a
Then there's
filmmaker.
that. Yeah, thanks,
Yeah,
Chester. I'm an idiot.
yeah, that's okay.
but yeah, there's a lot of things happening in this indie community that we're building. There's no drama llamas here, so we like to keep it that way, and we just want to focus on building good comics, good content for you guys, and we hope that you hop on board and join us in building this. um, I have the Immortal Mass at dinalescomic at gmail.com. Join that newsletter so you can be kept up to date to any news regarding that production. It's going fantastic, and I can't wait to show it when it's ready. But as always, and this is never true, then when I say it after this particular show, your perception shapes your reality. So always make it a good one.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Gesundheit.
Later, guys.
Have a good night.
Aloha.